In the mountains of ancient Greece, a royal dynasty believed its blood flowed straight from Olympus itself. They ruled in the name of gods worshipped, feared, and untouchable. But when prophecy demanded that divine blood remain unbroken, purity became corruption, and holiness turned to horror. This is the forgotten chronicle of a kingdom that defied nature in the name of heaven, a story of love so forbidden it brought down the very sky above Greece. In the northern reaches of ancient Greece lay the kingdom of Epirus, a land of marble peaks and mist-veiled temples where thunder seemed to rest upon the mountains. It was said that Zeus himself had chosen this place as his earthly reflection, and from it descended a royal house unlike any other. The people called them the skyborn mortals, whose veins carried divine fire. Among them were Prince Leandros and Princess Ariadne, twins born beneath a night sky torn open by lightning. From the moment they took their first breaths, priests and scholars bowed before their cradle, whispering blessings that were closer to worship than prayer. "The blood of Olympus flows through these children," declared the high priest of Dodona. "In them, the gods have returned to watch over men." As they grew, so did the myth. In the marble courtyards of the royal citadel, artists carved their faces into statues before they had even reached adolescence. The court poets called Leandros the thunder-given form and Ariadne the living moonlight. They were beautiful, inseparable, and disturbingly perfect children of prophecy and pride. Their father, King Orestes, believed the divine legacy of their line was all that held the kingdom together. Epirus was surrounded by rivals, its army small, its people restless. Only faith in the god-blooded monarchs preserved its fragile unity. To the king, his children were not heirs, they were salvation. But the gods who bless are the same gods who test. When the twins turned 15, an omen appeared. During the festival of Zeus, a storm broke without clouds. Thunder rolled through clear skies, shaking the temple foundations. The oracle of Dodona, ancient and blind, was summoned to interpret the sign. Before the assembled court, her cracked voice delivered words that would stain generations. "Two stars, born of one sky, shall merge and preserve the heavens. But should their light divide, the sky shall fall." The hall fell silent. The king's eyes filled with awe while the priests knelt in reverence. To them, the meaning was divine command. The twins were destined not merely to rule together, but to unite as one. Leandros and Ariadne, standing side by side, felt the weight of those words sink into their souls. They did not understand what union the oracle spoke of, only that destiny had bound them in a way no mortal bond could. In the years that followed, their lives became a ritual. They prayed together, dined together, slept in chambers separated only by a curtain of silk. The people saw them as living deities, echoes of Zeus and Hera reborn in flesh. Yet beneath the reverence stirred unease. Servants whispered of glances too tender, silences too heavy. By their 20th year, the boundaries between affection and worship had blurred beyond recognition. When Ariadne fell ill one winter, Leandros refused to leave her side for 7 days, fasting in her stead. The priests declared it an act of divine devotion, but those who saw his trembling hands and tearful eyes recognized something more human and far more dangerous. As the spring of their adulthood dawned, the kingdom celebrated their ascension as co-heirs. The mountains thundered again, though no storm appeared. To the faithful, it was Zeus himself blessing the bloodline once more. But in the silence of the royal shrine, Ariadne asked her brother a question that chilled even his sacred heart. "Leandros," she whispered, "if the gods command what love forbids, which do we obey?" He had no answer. Outside, the winds of prophecy began to rise soft at first, but gathering into the storm that would one day consume them all. The oracle of Dodona was older than memory itself, a sacred grove where the oak trees whispered the voice of Zeus through the wind. No empire, no king, dared defy its prophecies. Even Alexander once knelt here, trembling before the rustling leaves. For the people of Epirus, Dodona was not merely a temple, it was the lungs of Olympus. Now its voice summoned the royal bloodline once more. Years had passed since the prophecy of two stars destined to merge was first spoken. The words had settled in the palace like dust, worshipped yet never understood. But as the twins reached the age of marriage, the high priests demanded interpretation. King Orestes, eager to preserve divine legitimacy, ordered the sacred procession to Dodona. Leandros and Ariadne rode at the front, their faces veiled in gold and white. Behind them followed priests, soldiers, and citizens carrying garlands and sacrifices. The air was heavy with incense and awe, a pilgrimage not of faith, but of fear. When they arrived, the oracle awaited them beneath the ancient oak, her blind eyes milky and unblinking. She had lived through the reigns of 3 kings, and some whispered she had once spoken directly to Zeus. The wind stirred the branches above her head, and she lifted her hands, trembling, as though the sky itself flowed through her veins. "The blood of Zeus," she cried, "must remain unbroken, lest the sky fall upon all mankind." The words struck like thunder. No one breathed. The priests fell to their knees, hailing it as divine command. The king bowed, overcome with reverence. But Ariadne froze, her body rigid, her breath shallow. Leandros felt her hand tremble within his, her nails digging into his skin. "To preserve the blood of Olympus," said the priests, "the royal line must not mingle with mortal flesh." The only union worthy of such divinity was between those born of the same divine seed, Leandros and Ariadne themselves. Whispers of blasphemy rippled through the crowd. Even the soldiers looked uneasy. But to question the oracle was to question Zeus, and no mortal could survive such impiety. That night, the royal camp lay silent. Ariadne sat beside the sacred fire, her eyes fixed on the flames. "They wish to bind us," she whispered, "to make our hearts a shrine to their fear." Leandros said nothing. He stared into the darkness where the wind hissed through the oak leaves like distant laughter. When dawn came, the king summoned them to his tent. His crown lay beside him, forgotten. He looked old, older than either of them had ever seen. "Children," he said softly, "the gods have spoken. We must obey or risk the wrath that toppled Troy and drowned Atlantis." Ariadne's voice broke. "Father, we are not gods." He looked at her then with eyes both sorrowful and mad. "You are what they believe you to be. That is power enough." The decision was made. The royal scribes recorded it as divine decree. The bloodline of Zeus shall be preserved through holy union between Leandros and Ariadne. The announcement spread through Epirus like wildfire. The people rejoiced, though not all out of faith. Some celebrated out of terror, others out of awe. Priests declared the marriage would please the heavens. Philosophers whispered it would destroy them. That night, under the sacred oak, Leandros prayed alone. "Father of thunder," he murmured, "if we are your chosen, why do your blessings sound like curses?" The wind did not answer. When he returned to his sister's tent, she was still awake. Her eyes were red, her face pale as the moon. "We were born beneath lightning," she said. "Perhaps it was never meant to guide us, only to burn." In the distance, thunder echoed, not from the sky, but from within the mountains. The gods had spoken, and their words were chains. The day of their union was declared sacred across all of Epirus. From the marble steps of the temple to the distant coasts of Thesprotia, the people sang hymns to Olympus. They believed they were witnessing the rebirth of divinity, the gods made flesh once more through Leandros and Ariadne. But beneath the music and incense, something foul stirred, a quiet dread cloaked in gold. The temple of Zeus stood at the mountain's heart, carved from stone that seemed to glow with its own light. On that morning, the high priest prepared the altars with blood and myrrh. Lambs were slaughtered until the marble ran red, and their cries echoed through the valley like a lament for what was yet to come. The oracle herself, too frail to walk, was carried in upon a litter. She would witness the fulfillment of her prophecy. Leandros entered first, draped in white linen embroidered with silver lightning. His face was calm, but not from peace. It was the calm of a man who has accepted his own damnation. Ariadne followed, her gown flowing like a river of ivory, her hair crowned with laurel leaves. The crowd fell to their knees as the two ascended the altar steps. The priest's voice trembled as he spoke. "Before the eyes of Zeus, the skyborn shall become one, that Olympus may never fall." The ritual was long, drenched in symbolism. Each vow was sealed with the blood of a dove. Each prayer whispered to the heavens that watched in silence. When the final chant ended, the high priest pressed a golden blade to their palms, drawing blood from both, and joined their hands so that their blood mingled and fell upon the altar. "Thus," he cried, "the heavens and the earth are bound again." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the sound rang hollow. Ariadne's eyes glistened, not with joy, but with tears she dared not shed. Leandros turned his face toward the sky, but saw no sign from Zeus, only the faint tremor of thunder somewhere beyond the mountains, like distant mockery. That night, the palace was illuminated by torches and laughter. Poets sang of divine love reborn. Dancers mimed the descent of gods. The people feasted as though Olympus itself had joined them. Yet within the royal chambers, silence reigned. Leandros stood at the balcony, watching the flames below flicker like restless spirits. "They celebrate what they do not understand," he murmured. Ariadne sat by the bed, her wedding veil torn and forgotten on the floor. "We were promised holiness," she said quietly, "but I feel only grief." When he turned toward her, his face was pale, almost ghost-like in the lamplight. "If the gods demand this," he said, "then perhaps they envy what they created." Outside, the first storm of the season began to form. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating the statues of Zeus that lined the courtyard. The thunder rolled without rain, a storm without mercy. Inside their chamber, two souls bound by duty and despair faced the moment that would seal both their fates. There were no witnesses, only the echo of thunder and the slow fading of torchlight. By dawn, the priests announced that the sacred marriage had been consummated. The oracle declared the heavens appeased, and the city erupted once more in devotion. Offerings poured into the temple. The poor left coins at the steps, the rich offered jewels. Epirus believed itself chosen again, a kingdom of gods among men. But as the sun rose, Leandros and Ariadne could not meet each other's eyes. Something had shifted, not between them, but within them. The sacred vow had awakened not divinity, but corruption. In the silence after the celebration, Leandros whispered to himself a truth that chilled even him. "We have not fulfilled the will of the gods. We have replaced it." Outside, thunder growled once more, and the skies, for the first time, did not answer. A year after the sacred union, the palace of Epirus grew silent. The laughter of celebration had long vanished, replaced by murmurs that clung to the corridors like smoke. The queen no longer joined the festivals. The king no longer prayed in public. Even the priests, once bold with prophecy, began to speak in whispers. Something had shifted in the heart of Olympus's chosen. Then, on a night heavy with storm, the silence was broken. The midwives were summoned before dawn, the queen's cries echoing through the marble halls as thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning clawed at the mountains, and the rain came down in torrents, drumming against the golden domes like war. As the storm raged, the oracle's prophecy seemed to come alive. "From the womb of heaven," the priests chanted, "shall be born a child of thunder, the heir of lightning." When the storm broke, the infant lay still in the queen's arms, pale as marble, his eyes wide and unblinking. For a dreadful moment, the chamber froze. Then, with a sudden shudder, the child took his first breath. A sound unlike any other filled the air, not a cry, but a low, trembling hum, as if echoing from beneath the earth itself. They named him Dian. The priest declared him a living miracle, a god reborn in mortal flesh. To them, his silence was sacred. To Ariadne, it was terrifying. The child seldom cried, seldom moved. His eyes, when they opened, seemed to fix on things no one else could see. Servants whispered that he smiled at shadows and laughed when lightning struck. Weeks passed. Then tragedy. One afternoon, a storm swept over Epirus. Lightning struck the palace tower, splitting it clean in two. The nursemaid, who held Dian in her arms, was struck dead instantly. Her body burned to ash, though the child was untouched. When Leandros found them, the air still smelled of ozone and death. The people began to whisper that Zeus himself had visited his heir. The priests silenced any voice of doubt, declaring it proof of divine favor. But in the royal chambers, the king and queen spoke in fear. Ariadne no longer slept. She would stand over the child's cradle, watching the faint flicker of his eyelids, the eerie calm upon his face. "He does not dream," she whispered one night. "He listens." Leandros tried to summon faith. "The gods test us," he said. "Perhaps his silence is their sign." But faith was crumbling within him. The oracle had promised blessing, yet every divine act had come with death. His kingdom grew restless. Crops failed, storms ravaged the coasts, and disease began to spread among the poor. The priests demanded more sacrifices, more prayers, more devotion. The royal treasury emptied into temples, but the gods remained silent. When lightning struck again, this time the temple roof, Leandros fell to his knees before the altar, pleading to Zeus for mercy. But the sky gave no answer, only the echo of thunder, fading into nothing. In secret, the philosophers of Epirus began to record what they called the madness of the divine bloodline. They wrote of omens, of unnatural storms, of children born with eyes that did not blink, of kings who mistook their own reflection for godhood. Their writings would later be burned. One night, as rain battered the palace windows, Ariadne took her son in her arms and whispered, "If you are heaven's child, then tell me, why does your birth feel like a curse?" The child did not answer. His eyes, pale and distant, fixed on the flickering torch beside her, and when the flame bent toward him, it did not waver. In that silent glow, Ariadne understood. The gods had not given her a son. They had given her a warning. He arrived from Athens in the spring, a thin, quiet man with eyes that had seen too much of truth. His name was Damon of Chalcis, a scholar known for his teachings on virtue, reason, and the folly of divine kings. The court welcomed him with polite admiration. Epirus still longed to be seen as a child of Greece, not a relic of superstition. Yet in this palace of marble and incense, Damon carried the one thing no ruler could tolerate, a questioning mind. He was granted audience before the king and queen, where he spoke with calm precision. "Your Majesties," he began, "Athens once believed her rulers descended from gods. We learned too late that men who pretend to be divine lose their humanity." The court froze. Leandros stiffened in his throne, his hand tightening on the armrest. The priests exchanged glances, uncertain if they had heard blasphemy or truth. Ariadne lowered her eyes. Damon's words had pierced something within her, a wound long denied. The philosopher continued, voice steady, unafraid. "Incest is no sanctity, my lord. It is despair disguised as devotion. The gods do not bless those who worship themselves." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if mocking the quiet. The next morning, Damon was arrested. His writings were seized. His scrolls burned. The priests accused him of heresy, of denying the divine essence of the royal line. Leandros watched the trial from his balcony, saying nothing. Ariadne pleaded for mercy, but her voice trembled, and her guilt made her powerless. At dawn, Damon of Chalcis was dragged before the temple of Zeus, where the crowd awaited in forced reverence. The high priest read aloud his crimes. He has spoken against Olympus, denied the holiness of divine blood, and tempted the faithful toward doubt. Damon raised his voice one last time. If your gods demand incest to survive, then your gods are already dead. He was impaled at sunrise. His body hung upon the temple steps, the blood running down to mingle with the morning dew. The priests declared the act holy. The people turned away. But something changed that day, something in the air, in the city itself. The philosophers and scribes fled, burning their scrolls before they could be burned alive. The priests preached harder than ever, as if louder hymns could drown the echo of Damon's final words. Ariadne began to lose sleep. In her dreams, she saw the philosopher's eyes staring through the flames, unblinking, accusing. Her faith fractured, not in the gods, but in herself. She had obeyed prophecy, obeyed her father, obeyed her husband, yet she felt damned all the same. Leandros, however, grew harder. He told the priests that Damon's death was proof of divine will, that every drop of blood, spilled in the name of faith, was an offering Zeus demanded. The people began to fear their king more than they revered him. In the palace, the once golden halls began to dim. Statues of Zeus loomed over the courtyards like silent judges. The scent of incense no longer masked the stench of blood from endless sacrifices. When Ariadne tried to speak against her husband's cruelty, Leandros turned to her with eyes full of cold conviction. "We have become what we were destined to be," he said. "Do not defy the will that binds us to Olympus." That night, Ariadne wandered the temple grounds barefoot, her white gown trailing through blood and ashes. She paused where Damon had died, touching the stone darkened by his blood. "Perhaps," she whispered, "he was right. Perhaps the gods we serve were never gods at all." Above her, lightning flashed, but the sky did not answer. Only the hollow cry of a crow echoed through the temple of Zeus. And in that silence, the kingdom of Epirus began to rot from within. By the second decade of Leandros' reign, Epirus had begun to wither beneath its own piety. The once bright marble of the capital was stained with soot from endless sacrifices. The scent of blood never left the air. The people still prayed, but now they prayed in fear, not for blessings, but for the gods to look elsewhere. The kingdom had become a sanctuary of silence and suspicion. The philosopher's execution had torn the veil of divinity. The faithful still bowed, yet doubt crept behind every gesture. Generals whispered behind closed doors. Priests argued in secret whether the royal blood had indeed offended Olympus. Then came the plague. It began in the ports, among fishermen who handled dead birds fallen from the sky. Their bodies blackened, their tongues swelled, and within days entire households were carried to the pyres. The priests called it a trial sent by Zeus. The people called it vengeance. In the palace, Ariadne wandered the halls with her son Dion, now nearly 6, pale and wordless as ever. His silence had become legend. Some called him divine, others cursed. When he touched the walls, torches flickered. When he looked upon the sick, they sometimes died by morning. Leandros saw only omen. "The heavens test us," he told his council. "To prove our worth, we must show obedience." And so he ordered sacrifices beyond reason. First lambs, then bulls, then prisoners. When the plague worsened, he commanded that children be taken, the purest gifts to appease the wrath of Zeus. The high priests obeyed. Each night, the city glowed with funeral fires. Each morning, the rivers ran red with blood. Ariadne begged him to stop. "This is not faith," she cried. "It is madness." Leandros turned to her with hollow eyes. "You mistake mercy for sin. Would you rather the gods punish our son?" That name silenced her. For Dion had begun to change. His eyes glimmered faintly in the dark, reflecting light even when none was present. He rarely ate. The servants swore they saw him walking through the gardens at night, his bare feet leaving no prints in the dew. Ariadne grew afraid of her own child. She dreamt of the oracle's words, "The blood of Zeus must remain unbroken," and woke in tears, certain that the unbroken blood had cursed them all. When a soldier's child was taken for sacrifice, his father rebelled. He tried to storm the temple with his men, shouting, "No more gods who feed on our children." The rebellion was brief and crushed before nightfall. Leandros ordered the rebels' families executed and their bodies displayed along the palace gates as warnings to the faithless. But warnings only deepened despair. By autumn, the plague reached the palace itself. Servants died at their posts. The royal gardeners were buried beside their withered vines. Priests declared the deaths a sign that more sacrifice was required. The temple bells rang day and night, until even the sound of worship felt like mourning. Leandros began to fast and pray alone, locked in the high tower. His body weakened, but his conviction hardened. "If my blood offends the gods," he murmured, "then my blood shall feed them." Ariadne found him kneeling before the altar one evening, bleeding from his palms where he had cut himself with the sacrificial knife. "The gods demand more," he whispered, staring at his reflection in the crimson pool. "Perhaps I am no longer king, only the offering." That night, thunder rolled again. But it did not sound like anger. It sounded like laughter. Ariadne took her son and fled to her chambers, locking the doors. She sat with him through the storm, trembling as he stared at the window. "What do you see?" she whispered. Dion's lips parted for the first time in days. His voice was faint, almost tender. "They are watching, mother. And they are hungry." By the time the plague loosened its grip, the kingdom of Epirus had already lost its soul. Temples stood hollow, their marble altars streaked with old blood. The city's fountains, once filled with wine during festivals, now ran with stagnant water. And through it all, the boy Dion, the silent heir, watched. He was 7 years old when the records end. No chronicler ever wrote his death, only that he was gone. But the whispers that followed were enough to curdle faith across the empire. Some said the priests took him in secret, led him up the mountain to offer him to Zeus, the way ancient kings had once offered bulls. Others swore Ariadne herself drowned him in the palace cistern, driven mad by the thought of birthing something unholy. Whatever the truth, it began on the night the stars vanished. A storm had gathered without wind. The skies grew black and lightning forked through clouds that made no sound. The royal guards heard chanting from the temple district, hundreds of priests calling upon the god of thunder, begging him to cleanse the bloodline. Leandros, gaunt and sleepless, believed the gods had sent a final test. He ordered Dion brought to the temple. "He must prove he is divine," he declared. "If he bleeds, he is mortal. If he burns, he is blessed." Ariadne refused. She clutched her son, her hair unbound, eyes wild from days without rest. "You cannot offer him," she cried. "He is your child." Leandros turned from her. "He is the god's mistake, and we will pay the price." That night, a scream echoed from the temple, one that shook even the guards at the city walls. But when dawn came, the doors stood open and the altars were clean. No body, no blood, only silence. Leandros ordered a search of every home, every stable, every ship. But the boy was gone. Some said he had been taken by lightning itself, that Zeus had claimed his blood back into the heavens. Others whispered that Ariadne had hidden him beneath the palace in the tombs of forgotten kings. For months, she neither ate nor spoke. She wandered the halls in her mourning robes, pale as the marble statues that lined the corridors. Servants swore they heard her speaking softly to no one, singing lullabies to the air. Leandros, meanwhile, withdrew into divine obsession. "The gods have spoken through loss," he told his court. "They demand endurance." He renamed himself the mortal god, decreeing that his rule would outlast Olympus itself. The people did not believe. Famine followed plague. The empire's fields turned to dust. The farmers burned their idols, crying that the gods were dead. Rebellion spread from the mountain tribes to the coastal cities. Every province tore away from the crown, and the name of Leandros became a curse. Through it all, Ariadne fasted beneath the statue of her divine ancestor. She no longer wept. She waited. The oracle had once told her, the blood of Zeus must remain unbroken. Perhaps, she thought, it had not been broken at all. At night, the servants claimed to see a boy standing at the edge of her chamber, silent, barefoot, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. When they lit torches, he vanished. When they spoke of it aloud, they fell ill within days. Ariadne took this as a sign. "He is not gone," she whispered. "He waits between heaven and earth." Leandros heard her and laughed, a hollow, fevered sound. "Then let him watch," he said. "Let him see his father become the god he was born from." But in the marble corridors, beneath frescoes of heroes and storms, the silence of the child lingered, not as memory, but as curse. The royal blood had sought eternity and found only absence. Epirus stood on the edge of ruin. Its people prayed no longer to the sky, but to the ground, for mercy from the earth that would soon bury them all. The prophecy had run its course. The child of silence was gone, the queen was fading, and the king had crowned himself a god. But even gods bleed when faith turns to fire. Epirus had become a graveyard of marble and ash. Smoke rose from the lowlands where the first cities revolted. The priests, once the keepers of divine law, now denounced the throne. They called Leandros' union with his sister the blasphemy that unmade Olympus. Every sermon dripped with fury. "The lightning has forsaken the false god," they cried, and the crowds believed them. The banners of rebellion unfurled under a blood-red sky. Villages that once prayed to Leandros now spat upon his name. Statues of the royal pair were toppled into the sea, their faces shattered upon the rocks. Yet within the palace, the king remained unshaken. "They rage because they fear us," Leandros said, his voice thin from hunger and pride. Even Olympus was born in chaos. But Ariadne no longer answered him. She sat at the temple steps day after day, dressed in white as if already prepared for burial. The priests had fled, the servants gone. Only silence filled the corridors now, the same silence their son had left behind. When the rebels reached the city gates, Leandros ordered the remaining guard to defend the palace until the gods descend. None obeyed. By nightfall, the banners of rebellion burned at the palace gates. The high priest of Zeus himself stood with the insurgents. His robes were torn, his eyes wild. "You defied the heavens," he shouted. "Now the heavens defy you." Leandros looked down from the balcony, his crown gleaming faintly in the firelight. "You think the gods will reward your rebellion?" he called. "They reward devotion, even in damnation." Below, the mob roared. Stones struck the palace walls. Arrows flamed through the night. The air reeked of pitch and prophecy. Ariadne turned to her brother for the last time. "You still believe they watch us?" she asked quietly. Leandros smiled, a weary, broken smile. "They always have. Even now." Then, hand in hand, they fled through the corridors toward the temple of Zeus, the place where their love had first defied law and heaven alike. The marble floors trembled beneath their feet. Behind them, the palace burned like an offering. When they reached the temple, they found it already in ruin. The great statue of Zeus had cracked down the middle, lightning having long ago split its brow. The air smelled of smoke and rain, a storm gathering once more above the mountain. Leandros sank before the altar. His hands trembled as he lifted the golden chalice once used for sacrifice. "We began with faith," he whispered. "Let us end in it." Ariadne touched the rim, her eyes hollow. "Faith in what?" "In ourselves," he said. "We are all that's left of Olympus." They drank together, not in passion, but in despair. The hemlock's bitterness burned their throats, but neither flinched. As the poison spread, Ariadne's head fell against his shoulder, her hair a dark river across his chest. Outside, the rebels breached the temple gates. The roar of battle filled the air, and above it came thunder. A single bolt split the sky, striking the temple dome with divine fury. The marble exploded in a blinding flash, fire and lightning swallowing God and mortal alike. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ruin. And for the first time in years, the sky was silent. The house of gods and men had fallen together, not destroyed by war, but by belief itself. The age of divine kings was over. At dawn, the world that once bowed to marble gods awoke to silence. Smoke drifted over Epirus, curling through broken pillars and blackened courtyards. The temple of Zeus, once radiant with hymns and sacrifice, now stood hollow, its dome shattered by divine fire. No banners waved, no prayers rose. Only the cry of crows circled above what had once been the house of heaven. When the rebels entered, they found the throne room burned to its bones. The tapestries of golden storms lay in ashes. The statue of Zeus had fallen face first, its eyes gouged by flame. And on the altar, where once the king and queen had been crowned by priests, they found two bodies entwined. Leandros and Ariadne, brother and sister, king and queen, lovers and heretics. Their faces were strangely peaceful, untouched by the ruin around them. His arm encircled her shoulders. Her hand rested upon his heart. Between them lay the golden chalice, still half filled with the dark residue of hemlock. The priest who found them fell to his knees. "They died as gods die," he murmured. "In their own fire." The city did not rejoice. Victory brought no triumph. What had been rebellion now looked like sacrilege. The people, who once screamed for vengeance, now spoke in whispers. Some said the thunder that struck the temple had been Zeus himself, reclaiming the blood that dared to mimic his own. Others said it was no god at all, only the sky weeping for what men had destroyed in his name. The bodies were carried through the ruins in silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The rebels wanted them burned, their ashes scattered to erase the memory of their sin. But the priesthood intervened. "The gods demand burial," said the high priest, his voice trembling. "They were divine once, and divinity, even fallen, must be sealed." So the last ceremony of the Skyborn was performed beneath the broken dome. Candles flickered in the wind as the tomb was sealed with marble slabs cut from the ruins of their own temple. Upon the stone, the priest carved the words that would outlive them all. "Here sleeps the blood of heaven, cursed by its own perfection." Years passed. The empire that once glimmered with gold became dust. The plague devoured its people. Cities emptied. The scholars who survived rewrote the royal chronicles, erasing their names from the lineage of kings. But whispers endured, in hidden scrolls, in half-burnt inscriptions, in the murmurs of travelers who passed through the ruins at night. They said that sometimes when lightning touched the peaks of Epirus, two shadows could be seen kneeling beside the temple's remains, a man crowned in flame and a woman draped in starlight. Not ghosts, but memories, bound to the promise they had made, to remain together until Olympus fell. The centuries blurred, and their story became legend. Poets softened it into romance. Priests turned it into warning. Yet beneath every retelling lingered the same truth, that the divine bloodline had destroyed itself, not by sin, but by believing it was holy. In time, no one remembered their faces. Only the echo of their choices remained, the echo of two mortals who dared to become gods, and in doing so, tore heaven from its throne. Epirus never rose again. The palaces crumbled, the altars vanished beneath ivy and soil. The world moved on, crowned new emperors, built new temples, forged new myths. But the mountains kept their secret, and when the storm returned, thunder still rolled across their peaks like the voice of an angry god, reminding all who listened that even the purest blood can drown in its own divinity.